Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery here for our Friday morning live stream, offered regularly here online on YouTube and possibly also on Facebook most times. And so, for anyone who might be watching this after it's been recorded, I hope that you're doing well, whatever time it might be for you. And we will be today looking at a sutta called the Udayasutta. It is in the Samyutta Nikaya, and it's Samyutta Nikaya 7.12. So for those who are less familiar with the basic collection of Buddhist scriptures, Buddhist texts, the canon, then we have what's known as the Sutta Pitaka, and that is the sutta means a discourse. So sutta is something which is spoken, generally speaking, by the Buddha or by one of the Buddha's disciples. And the Pitaka means a basket where you collect things. So the Sutta Pitaka is like a basket where all the different Buddhist scriptures of the discourses of the Buddha and his disciples are collected together, right? So teachings of the Buddha, teachings of his disciples, teachings about the Dhamma and about the Vinaya, so about the doctrine and about the training. And within the Sutta Pitaka, we have 5 major divisions, and those are the long sayings. So these are discourses, essentially, speeches and Dhamma talks and collections of teachings, which are lengthy, which are quite long. And then you have that's called the Digha Nikaya. And then you have the middle length sayings. So these are discourses and teachings which are of middle length. And that's called the Majjhima Nikaya. And then you have the collected sayings or the connected sayings. And these are collections of teachings and discourses and so on, which are actually organized not by the length of the teaching, but rather by the topic, right? So for example, or organized around some particular theme. So for example, you might have the whole chapter of teachings about the senses, or a whole chapter on interactions with Brahmins, or interactions with bhikkhunis, or something like that. And so these are teachings which are arranged according to particular topics and themes, called the Samyutta Nikaya. And then you finally, of the 4 major collections, you have what's called the numerical or the incremental sayings, the incremental collection, the Anguttara Nikaya. And those are teachings which are organized around the principle of numbers, right? So the Buddha might say there is one thing, or this is one thing, or he might say there's these 2 things, or he might say there's 5 types of people, or he might say, he might give a list which has 7 major sections to it. And so the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical sayings or the incremental collection, is discourses and teachings which are arranged according to a list of incrementing numbers. And then finally, you have what's called the minor collection, which is a kind of a catch-all of many smaller books. So books of poetry, books of kind of anthologies, suttas. And so that's called the Khuddaka Nikaya. And so today we'll be looking, as I mentioned, at the Samyutta Nikaya, and Samyutta Nikaya chapter number 7. Chapter number 7 is the Brahmana Samyutta, which is the chapter on Brahmins. So, of course, some of you may know or even be Brahmins today. So Brahmins, of course, still exist. They are a caste from Indian society. And in the time of the Buddha, they also had Brahmins, right? Although, of course, maybe what we now think of as Brahmins wouldn't be exactly the same, because this was thousands of years ago, but the general basic lineage there was in existence. And Brahmins are, in the suttas, Brahmins refers to a caste of priestly people. So people who were inheritors of the Vedas, inheritors of the religious scriptures, as well as the ritual procedures and the religious duties and so on, customs of the Vedic tradition. And the Brahmins were essentially the priestly caste. So you might be reborn into a priestly caste. So for example, if maybe your father was a Brahmin and then you were born, then that means you're a Brahmin. And so, usually both parents would be Brahmins, but you actually, and kind of interestingly, in ancient India, and you had different manuals even kind of saying like, how do you tell if one is a Brahmin, based off their parents, and, how far back does it have to be and how pure do they have to be and so on. So I'm sure that probably is still relevant in some parts of India today, as it is in many other cultures, right? Not with Brahmins, but with other things, right? So even nowadays, the modern kind of secular consumerist version of that might be like you get your DNA tested. It's like, what percentage of this are you? And that's kind of, what is it? How much does it have to be to count, type of thing. So that's like a modern sort of less, more secular version. But so Brahmins were a caste, and they were determined, generally speaking, one was a Brahmin based off their family. So the Buddha was famous for flipping around that topic. So the Buddha was one of the major aspects of his teaching was that one is not a holy person. So you're not you don't become a priest, you don't become a religious holy person, you don't become more pure, you don't have more rights to religious duties just because of the family that you're born into. But rather, the Buddha said one becomes a Brahmin, meaning one becomes a holy person, one becomes a religious person, one becomes someone who is worthy of donations and offerings, worthy of religious guidance. One becomes a Brahmin not by their family, but by what they do. And so the Buddha phrased this as one is a Brahmin not by birth, one is a Brahmin by action, by deed. Right? So, and the Buddha said, for example, if you kill animals, then you're known as a hunter. If you perform ceremonies, you're known as a religious ceremonialist. If you sell merchandise, you're known as a merchant. If you work in the fields, you're known as a farmer. And if you're holy, then you're known as a Brahmin. So what is he saying there? Right? He's saying that it's what we do. Right? We are what we're doing, not what we are born into, not what we look like. So that is a very important kind of fundamental teaching, which repeats time and again within these early Buddhist discourses. And of course, relevant as well today, because we might maybe in outside of India, the question of whether or not one is a Brahmin becomes relatively irrelevant unless you're in an Indian diaspora community. But for those who are not related to Indian communities, then you might not find it very relatable, right, to think about Brahmins, right? It might seem irrelevant to you. But of course, we do have these misconceptions in our society, right? We do have these ideas of, based off one's family, like rich or poor, how we class them in terms of their ethnicity or their race or their class or their education or their family name, their lineage, or things like this. Then we think that almost their identity or their character is determined and fixed because of that, right? We think that one's character is fixed by the background that they're raised into, the background that they happen to find themselves within. But of course, the Buddha said, that is not the case, and that actually we are what we do, right? We are the heirs of our deeds. And so actually what we're doing now is what's important, not what we've done in the past, and not what we are receiving the results of in the present, but rather what are we doing in the present. So that's a little bit of a context for what is a Brahmin, both in the traditional sense of, it's a caste, it's something that your family is part of, and it's also is an occupation. So many Brahmins would also be priests. They would also do priestly duties, but not necessarily as a full-time job. So in the suttas, many Brahmins might be farmers and so on. They're not necessarily just like it's not necessarily the case that their only occupation is to be a Brahmin, but they would have that role. So they would have particular customs, right? So they might, in their household, they might keep a fire where they would offer things to the fire, do certain chanting, and uphold certain religious ceremonies and maybe festivals and holidays, and so on. So the Brahmins would have certain practices and rituals. Similar to in the outside of India, you have Jewish communities, right? And so someone who's Jewish, that doesn't mean that they're a rabbi or that they are living a religious only life, right? So many Jewish people who are devout Jewish people, they aren't, they have a job and a secular job, and they do secular activities and so on. But they might, if they are particular types of Jewish communities, right, they might uphold certain customs. So they might wear certain things. They might eat and not eat certain foods. They might have certain festivals and holidays that they observe very closely and strictly. They might have certain principles and precepts that they maintain, and religious scriptures and so on, recitations and gatherings. And so that's a modern example of like maybe a more Orthodox Jewish community is something that you're born into, And independently of your beliefs and your occupation, you maintain certain customs and habits, right? So the Brahmins are much more like that. So they're not necessarily, just because they're Brahmins doesn't necessarily mean that they are religious teachers, just like a Jewish person isn't necessarily a religious teacher. But the Orthodox Brahmins would, Orthodox in the sense of, people who upheld the customs, they would have been maintaining particular customs and so on. And so the Brahmins were, in the suttas, often quoted as believing that they come from the mouth of Brahma, and other people come from different parts of the body, but they come from the mouth, which is like the head. It's the the higher part, and they're like they are the heirs of Brahma. They're the closest to Brahma's speech, right? Because they recite the Vedas. So the Brahmins often had, some of them had a sense of superiority around their caste, right? Just like, again, nowadays you might have people who are wealthy, well-educated, from particular racial status and neighborhoods, and then they might feel superior because of where their family and so on. So the Brahmins often had a sense within their tradition of believing that they were essentially more chosen, more holy, more righteous, more religious by nature, which is what the Buddha was pushing against. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were just doing religious things. So that's just a bit of context. And so now you have a sense of what is a Brahmin and what is the Buddha, what does he say about some of that? And now we'll go ahead and look at our sutta. And so this is the Udayasutta. At Savatthi. Then the Buddha robed up in the morning, and taking his bowl and robe, went to the home of the Brahmin Udaya. Then Udaya filled the Buddha's bowl with rice. The next day, the Buddha robed up in the morning, and taking his bowl and robe, went to the home of the Brahmin Udaya. And a second time, Udaya filled the Buddha's bowl with rice. And a third time, the next day, the Buddha went to the home of the Brahmin Udaya. And then Udaya filled the Buddha's bowl again with rice. But when he had filled the Buddha's bowl on the third day, he said to the Buddha, "This ascetic Gautama is such a drag. He keeps coming back again and again." And then the Buddha responds, "Again and again, they sow the seed. Again and again, the King of the heavens sends rain. Again and again, farmers plow the field. Again and again, grain is produced for the nation. Again and again, the beggars beg. Again and again, the donors give. Again and again, when the donors have given, again and again, they take their place in heaven. Again and again, dairy farmers milk. Again and again, a calf cleaves to its mother. Again and again, oppressing and intimidating, that dole returns to the womb again and again. Again and again, you're reborn and die. Again and again, you get carried to eternal ground. But when they've gained the path for no further rebirth, when a vast wisdom is not reborn again and again." When he had spoken, the Brahmin Udaya said to the Buddha, "Excellent, worthy Gautama, excellent, Master Gautama." And he requests that the Master Gautama remember him as a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life. And that's the end of this sutta. So we can say 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And offer some comments. So yeah, this is a wonderful sutta, and it was probably selected for me because I often mention this here at the monastery. So I assume that that's why this was picked. And so yeah, this is a wonderful teaching. I really find this so relevant, so much a core part of our practice in many, many ways. So let's just review, what happens, right? So the Buddha, he's going alms round, and he's going alms round, and he goes to a Brahmin's house. So the Buddha would go alms just like we do here. So just yesterday, I went alms and went to the village and went to the town, and I've been to that town several times now, again and again, and many times to the same shops again and again. And so the Buddha went to the Brahmin's house, and he brought his bowl, and he robed up, and he went for alms. And the Brahmin gave him rice. So the Brahmin was generous, right? He gave him some alms food. And then the Buddha went the next day to the same house. He went again, and the Brahmin gave him alms food. And then the Buddha went a third time. He went to the same house, the same person, and he gave him alms food. And then the Brahmin says, he keeps coming back again and again. You're back again. He says, this ascetic is such a drag, right? And, it's like, again, you're here again, like 3 times, isn't it enough type of thing? So, he's saying like, he gives him the food, but he's like, really? This is a bit much. You keep coming here again and again. You keep coming back for more food. You keep coming to my house, and kind of complaining that he's doing the same thing over and over again 3 times. And then what does the Buddha say to this, right? The Buddha it's often said that the Buddha would respond to the conditions around him, right? And in the commentary, it said that he would actually survey in the morning he would enter meditation and he would survey, was there anyone that day who he could benefit? Is there anyone that day who he could interact with? And what conditions were ripe? What would he need to say? What would he need to do? What would he need to teach or help in order to help people's conditions ripen so that they could then understand the Dhamma or practice the Dhamma? And so, presumably, maybe the Buddha knew that this Brahmin had some potential, but he had maybe some stinginess, right? So he knew, okay, he's going to keep going over and over again to the Brahmin's house. So he went again and again and again. He went 3 times. And then the Brahmin finally kind of snaps and says, enough. Or he's saying, again, you're back again. And what does the Buddha say, right? He says, again and again, they sow the seed. So this person is a farmer, right? Presumably this Brahmin is a farmer. And what is the Buddha saying, right? He's saying, as a farmer, over and over again, day after day, year after year, you do the exact same thing. Again and again and again and again. Like, imagine just planting a seed, right? You take the seed, you put it in the field. Take another seed, you put it in the field. Take another seed, put it in the field. Take another seed, put it in the field. And this is before, technology and like tractors and automatic planting. So often, you might be going with like a donkey, might have a seed, and you just plant them one by one in a line, right? So it takes a while, and you do it again and again and again, and you're planting, and then finally you get the whole field done, right? He says, again and again, the King of the heavens sends rain, right? So then it rains, and often farmers are happy when it rains, right? So we have a forest monastery in rural Italy, and sometimes, there's lots of farmers all around, and sometimes they talk about, the rain because it's interesting to them because it affects their crops. It affects, how things grow. And so for people who live in the city, the rain might just appear to you as like a nuisance or something, or maybe you enjoy it. But it really, often in modern urbanized societies, people don't understand. They don't have a lived embodied experience of what is the significance of rain. It just seems like some kind of random part of just a random part of the world that sometimes it rains. But for farmers, for people who live in the country, it's very relevant. Like, they're very watching, how long has it been since it rained, and when is it going to rain, and what's the weather looking like, because it affects them. And so they're constantly thinking about the rain, and it rains, and then they get happy, and it rains, and then, it rains again and again and again. It rains your whole life. You always experience rain, right? It's always going to be raining at some point in time. So there's rain again and again and again, and we keep thinking about it. We keep talking about it. Oh, it rained the other day. Oh, it's raining. And so rain again and again. And then the Buddha says, again and again, farmers plow the field. Again and again, grain is produced for the nation. So then similarly, so planting seeds again and again and again, you plant the field over and over and over and over and over again. You do the exact same thing, planting a seed. Over and over and over and over and over again, it rains and you're concerned about the rain. Over and over and over and over and over again, you plow the field. So you plow it, you till it, prepare it. And over and over and over and over and over again and again and again, they harvest the field. And then the next year, what do? More planting, more raining, more plowing, more harvesting. And then again, next year, and again, the next year, and again, the next year. So your whole life, again and again and again, you do the exact same thing as a farmer, right? Again and again and again and again, over and over and over again. But this person gives alms 3 times, and he's complaining about it. So he does something good, he's generous 3 times, and he's already complaining about how it's repetitive. So what is the Buddha pointing out here, right? It's very subjective, isn't it? So again and again, his job, he does the exact same thing over and over and over again. But you do something good, you do something, beautiful, like giving, feeding. This is the Buddha that we're talking about here as well. It's not just, so he's feeding the Buddha, he's feeding a monk, a Buddhist monk, a spiritual practitioner. And after 3 times, he's already complaining about how it's repetitive, right? So you just notice like, oh, wait a minute. And then the Buddha says, again and again, the beggars beg. Again and again, the donors give. Again and again, when the donors have given, again and again, they take their place in heaven. And you'll notice that there is actually a rhythmic quality. So this is a poem, right? The Buddha is actually speaking in poetry. I should have said that because it might not be obvious. So in English, this is translated, of course. But the poem is actually, this is a poem. And so maybe I'll recite it so you can hear it a little bit. So the Buddha says, Punappunang cheva vapanti bijang, punappunang vasati devaraja, punappunang kittang kasanti kassaka, punappunang dhanyamupeti rathang, punappunang yacheka yachiyanti, punappunang danapati dadanti, punappunang danapati daditva, punappunang saggamupenti dhanang, punappunang kharinika duhanti, punappunang vachopeti maturang, punappunang kilamati pandati cha, punappunang gabhamupeti mando, punappunang jayati miyati cha, punappunang sivatikang haranti, maganchaladha apunabhavaya, na punappunang jiyati bhuri panyoti, na punappunang jayati bhuri panyoti. So that's just a brief recitation. So here you see it's punappunang, 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 punappunang. So punappunang means again and again. Punna means again. So punappunang, right? And so the Buddha is saying, what does the Brahmin say? He says, samano gotamo punappunang agacchati. So he says, pakataka, I'm sorry, pakataka, it's a strange word. Pakatako yang samano gotamo punappunang agacchati. So he's saying that translated here by Bhante Sujata is, this ascetic Gautama is such a drag. And it seems that the word that he's using is related to the word for like drawing a plow. So it seems that it's interpreted here as basically like a slang or a slur or an insult, meaning like, just like we say in English, it's a drag, like you're dragging it along, like it's annoying. And then he says, the ascetic Gautama, punappunang agacchati. He comes again and again. He's coming again and again. He's returning again and again. Punappunang. And so then the Buddha takes that word, punappunang, and he then turns it into a poem. And he says, punappunang, again and again, they're planting seed. Punappunang, it's raining. Punappunang, they're plowing the field. Punappunang, they're producing the nation. And punappunang, again and again, the beggars beg. Right? So as a beggar, as the Buddha, he might go for alms round almost every single day, right? Very, very often. Again and again, you go for alms round. Again and again. And again, the donors give. So just like a farmer, so now the Buddha is relating the task of a farmer to the task of a mendicant and the donors, right? So a farmer, they do the same thing over and over and over again. Or if you work some other job, you do the same thing basically over and over and over again, right? You just think about something like this. Again and again, you eat breakfast. Or you eat lunch, right? So you eat food every single day, over and over and over again, day after day, day after day, day in, day out, eating food. And yet you still find it enjoyable most of the time. Day in, day out, day after day in, day out, again and again, you go to sleep. And you still find it enjoyable and nourishing to sleep most of the time. Again and again, day in, day out, over and over again, again and again, maybe you read books or watch movies or listen to music, and you find it relatively enjoyable, right? It's like another show, another book, another song, another conversation, another friend, again and again and again. Again and again, you cook your meals. You do some cooking maybe. Again and again. So we do many, many things our whole life over and 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 over again. And often we find those things enjoyable. We do it habitually and we don't complain about it really. Every now and then people might complain, but they actually mostly enjoy it. And again, but when it comes to the Brahmin, 3 times he's given alms and he's already complaining. So what is the Buddha saying here? So now he's comparing this to the beggars. He's saying, well, again and again, the beggars, just like a farmer, goes and plows the field and then plants the seed. Again and again, beggars, alms mendicants, for example, go and beg. And again, donors give, just like planting a seed. So the Buddha said that we should be a field of merit for the world. So a field of merit means people plant their donations in us, and we should be very fertile and ripe to allow those to sprout into really good karma, right? Really good merit. So the Buddha encouraged us to try to become a field of merit. And so again and again, donors give. And then the Buddha says, again and again, when donors have given, again and again, they take their place in heaven. So people get reborn again and again and again and again in heaven. They get reborn in pleasant places over and over and over again because of practicing dana, giving, and because of practicing sila, virtue, generosity, right? Kindness. So doing kind deeds like giving alms, the Buddha is saying actually again and again and again and again, people who do it, then what happens? Again and again and again and again, they go to heaven. So it's not a bad thing. And he's kind of saying like, there's many things that we do over and over again. But when it comes to doing something good, something kind, something that gives heaven, something that leads to happiness, then there's nothing to complain about. Again and again, it leads to goodness. And even if you don't necessarily believe in heaven or you're skeptical of that teaching, well, again and again, when you give, again and again, you become happy from that, right? You can rejoice in that. Again and again, you think you've done something good. Again and again, you get to uplift someone, help them. Again and again, you get to feel light and easy, right? So giving, it's not something to complain about. It's like again and again and again, doing the same thing every single day. Just like all the other things we do every single day, right? Getting in the car, maybe taking a walk, reading, listening, driving, going to work, talking to people, hanging out with family members, just list down the things that you tend to do. And it's probably, you repeat them probably over and over and over and over and over again. So when it comes to doing things like making merit, we shouldn't be complaining, right? When it comes to meditation, it's like, again, another meditation, again, another breath, another Dhamma talk, or another, another time to follow the precepts or whatever. We shouldn't be complaining because again and again, we do all kinds of things which are actually, unwholesome or maybe lazy or habitual or kind of, they don't actually have any rewards. It's just like the pleasure or the benefit or the comfort or the doing things that we're used to doing, but actually they're not actually doing any goodness, right? So like maybe some people, they listen to music over and over and over again, all day, every day almost. And they don't get tired of it. But they're actually not creating any merit. They're not doing anything good, which is uplifting to the heart, which establishes them with happiness in the future, happiness in the present, like makes them light, makes them, makes the heart nourished. It's actually just like a distraction, right? A pleasant distraction. So again and again, we do all kinds of things which are just distractions. But when it comes to doing good things, if we do them again and again, it just leads to happiness again and again. But often we can be reluctant to do that. So the Buddha is pointing that out here, right? Very astute, very astute. And then he continues. He says, again and again, dairy farmers milk. Again and again, a calf cleaves to its mother. Again and again, oppressing and intimidating, the dholad returns to the womb again and again. So what is the Buddha pointing out here? Well, here he's kind of talking about, he's starting to turn from the subject of farming and life. Now he's starting to turn to the topic of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, transmigration, the existential problems of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death, right? So again and again, dairy farmers, they milk. So again, another type of farmer, they do a task over and over again. And the calf cleaves to its mother, right? So the cows, they stick together. And so there's this attachment between, again and again, children being with their parents, parents being with their children, families sticking together over and over and over and over and over again, doing the same thing. And again, oppressing and intimidating. So doing things like harming people, right? Crimes. Then that person returns, they get reborn. They return to the womb again and again. And now the Buddha, now he gets to the main part of the teaching here. It says, Punappunang jayati miyati cha punappudang sivatikang haranti magancha ladha punabhavaya na punappunang jayati bhuripanyoti. So again and again, you're reborn and die. Again and again, you get carried off to a charnel ground. But when they've gained the path for no further rebirth, not rebirth again, one of vast wisdom is not reborn again and again. So then the Buddha gets to the main teaching, and it's like, again and again we get reborn, and again we die, over and over again. And the Buddha famously says, Anamata goyang bhikkhave sangsaro pubbakoti napanyayati avidya nivarananang satanang tanha sanyojananang sandhavatang sangsaratam. So he says, transmigration, the cycle of rebirth, has no discoverable beginning. No first point can be found of beings blinded by ignorance and shackled by craving, roaming and transmigrating. Right? And the Buddha says, for such a long time, for this long time, Digamadhana, for a long time, we have roamed and transmigrated through the cycle of rebirth. And by a long time, he means a long time. He means a long time, right? Not a short time. And there's one point where the Buddha tries to give a simile about how long is one eon, right? So in Buddhist cosmology, we talk about how the universe expands, right? What was now called like the Big Bang, basically, right? It expands and it expands for a long, long time and it contracts. And so the eon is the age of a universe. And the Buddha tries to say, how long is one eon? And I'll try to remember the simile correctly. He gives different ones, but one of them he says is, imagine that you have a massive, like 1,000 leagues tall, I think, like 1,000 leagues of pure solid rock. So like a massive, massive mountain, a huge block of rock stretching up into the sky. And every 100 years, so just once in 100 years, a bird passes by it has a scrap of silk. Very, very, silk is very soft. So just a scrap of silk in its mouth. And once every 100 years, the bird would pass by and just softly, just scrape the silk across the rock. He says the rock would wear down. You would wear down and destroy the entire mountain before the end of an eon. So a massive, imagine like something like Mount Everest, but like a huge block of stone. And every 100 years, just one little piece of silk is rubbed across it. The entire mountain would be gone before one eon was over. And the Buddha said, one eon, that's just one. So the Buddha says there is no discoverable beginning to how many eons we've passed. So that's a lot. That is a long time, right? That is not a short time. That's a long time. And so and again, for that whole time, for as far as we can possibly ever remember, we can't find a point. There's no point that someone can find, right? No matter, and the Buddha is saying, for the beginning of that, and the Buddha is saying, what are we doing in that time? What have we been doing? We have been living our life, growing up, getting old, aging, getting sick, and dying. And then we get reborn again. Grow up, live life, start aging, get sick, and we die. And then we get reborn again. We grow up, we live, have our families, or live our lives, whatever we're doing, become monks, get old, get sick, and we die. And then we get reborn again. And we've been doing that for such a long time that the Buddha, he says it's hard to even give a simile to even try to imagine it. So again, then you take it back and you look at the context, right? And the Brahmin here is complaining about giving alms food 3 times. 3 times he's already complaining. And he's saying, oh, this is such a drag, again, doing the same thing, or, again, we have to do this whole thing. We have to do this over again. And the Buddha is saying like, well, wait a minute. Again and again, you're getting reborn and you're still not tired. You're still not over it, right? We're still coming back. We're still attached to the same things. Attached again. And 3 times you do something like making merit, which is actually a cause of happiness, which can actually be a condition for attaining nibbana, which can actually be a condition for ending the cycle of rebirth. 3 times and he's already complaining. But he's not complaining about 1 birth, 2 births, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 100, 50, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, a million, 100 million, a billion, 300 trillion, more and more births, deaths, aging, sickness, families, the same thing over and over again. He's not complaining, right? So That's a lot. And so, when we're meditating and it's like again and again, it's like, yeah, of course. This is nothing compared to the amount of things we repeated over and over again. It's nothing. So the only thing which is not repetitive, the only thing which actually leads somewhere is the Dhamma. It's Dhamma practice. It's giving, it's virtue, it's meditation, right? It's practicing our precepts, it's trying to develop stillness of mind, and it's trying to develop wisdom. That is the only thing, right? The Noble Eightfold Path, it's the only thing which is not leading to just another circle around ourselves, just another repetitive cycle. So pursuing sensual pleasures, pursuing families and jobs and enjoyable things and shows and music and comfortable situations and environments, again and again we do that. We've been doing that for such a long time. The Buddha himself had a hard time coming up with a way to even try to imagine how we could think about that over and over again. And we're not tired yet. But do we get tired of meditating? Do we get tired of chanting? Do we get tired of going to the temple, the monastery? Do we get tired of giving? Do we get tired of reading the suttas, listening? Do we get tired of that? We don't seem to get tired of what our defilements want, right? We don't seem to get tired of what craving wants. We don't seem to get tired of what ignorance is looking for. But we definitely get tired of that which leads to the end of those things. And so there's a question here. It's like, what is going on, right? What's the problem? This is all in reverse because this is the last thing we should be complaining about doing again and again. The thing which leads to our well-being, our happiness, our welfare. So the Buddha is trying to point this out here, right? He's trying to say, the only thing who is not reborn again and again, the only thing which leads to not doing the same thing over and over and over again is developing the path. So the path, of course, includes generosity, as the Brahmin was practicing. And so there's nothing to complain about, right? If anything, we should be complaining like, again, I'm attached again to distracting myself. Again, I have to do the same thing. For what? Where does this lead? And sometimes it can actually be helpful. Like in meditation, you might notice that your mind is interested in maybe thinking. It's interested in doing something else, interested in doing chores, interested in reading, interested in listening, interested in going outside, interested in, getting some food or whatever. And just, it can be helpful actually to follow that train of thought and actually say like, okay, then what? And then what after that? And what about after that? And you'll realize, like, you'll just by reflecting on that, you'll be able to reflect that what's after it, just another thing. And there's no end. This is the delusion of craving. This is the blindness of ignorance that we have, friends. It is the belief that this blind delusion, this blind faith, this religious faith, that we will be happy by repeating and indulging in the senses, the aggregates, the world, over and over again. Are we? Are we satisfied yet? Is our hunger appeased? Do we have our dinner? Do we have our meal? And then do we think, oh, good, I've eaten. Okay, I guess I'm done then. I guess I don't need to eat anymore. Are we satisfied after one meal? Or do we want more food? Do you listen to a song and then think, oh, I guess I've listened to music, so I guess that's enough. Are we satisfied? Or do we need more? Do we clean the house and then think, oh, I guess I've cleaned it, so I guess I don't need to do that again? Or do we have to do it again? Is there ever an end to these things? And if you look at your mind, just really look into your mind, you will see, actually, the mind doesn't have an end. The hunger has no end. It is a bottomless stomach. Our eyes, sometimes we say people's eyes are bigger than their stomach, right? Because they want to eat, they see food and they try to eat more than they can actually handle. Our eyes are as wide as the earth, Our stomach is as bottomless as the universe. We are completely insatiable. But the problem is, because of ignorance and because of craving, they obscure that to us. These defilements, these outflowings of the mind, these impediments and obstructions, these hindrances, these obstacles, these chains which tie us down and cause our suffering, these blind us, friends. They cover our vision. They make us unwise. And that's why it's important to really follow that train of thought. So if you're meditating, for example, and meditation is a good time, you can do it outside of meditation as well. But meditation is a good time because you're just focusing on that ideally, right? And you just see, like, let's say, you're thinking, like, I kind of want to go up, I kind of want to do something else. And okay, so where would that lead then? So what about after that? And then, okay, so then you think, okay, I want to do, maybe I'll make some food. Okay, what about after that? And what about after that? And what about after that? And you'll see, if you follow that impulse, where does it want to take you? It will take you right up to your death. It's no joke. You will see that. If you just investigate, if I follow my impulse, if I just follow where my craving and my ignorance want to lead me, where are they going to go? When will they stop? They will not. It will go right up to the time that you're dying, and then you will still want more. And we will get reborn again. Okay, so then you get reborn again. Okay, now what? Same exact thing. And then they die, and then they get reborn. Same exact thing. Again and again and again. The same thing. Again and again. And it doesn't matter if it's chocolate ice cream. It doesn't matter if it's vanilla ice cream. It doesn't matter if it's, what is it called? Neapolitan or something ice cream. It doesn't matter if it's strawberry ice cream or if it's cookie dough ice cream. It's all ice cream. It's the same thing over and over again. It's just another flavor. It doesn't matter if it's classical music. It doesn't matter if it's rock music. It doesn't matter if it's hip hop music or rap music or jazz music. It's just another sound. It doesn't matter if it's the smell of sweet incense, if it's the smell of spicy food, if it's the smell of this perfume or that perfume, this cologne or that cologne, if it's the smell of jasmine or sandalwood, if it's the smell of a fresh field or the smell of the rain, it's just another smell. It doesn't matter if it is the feeling of warm when we're cold or the feeling of cool when we're hot. It doesn't matter if it's the feeling of something soft or the feeling of something hard. It doesn't matter if it's the smooth texture or a rough texture. It doesn't matter if the clothes are this color or that color, if they are wool or silk. It's just another texture, just another experience of the body. It doesn't matter if it's the thought about the past, a thought about the future. It doesn't matter if it's a good thought or a bad thought. It doesn't matter if it's an anxious thought or a depressed thought, a happy thought or a sad thought. It doesn't matter if it's an elated thought or a equanimous thought. It doesn't matter if it's a peaceful mood or a tranquil mood, or if it's a happy mood or an excited mood or a restless mood or a tired mood or a dull mood or a drowsy mood. It's just another mood. It's just another thought. When will we be satisfied? And again, if we follow our ignorance, ignorance is never satisfied. That's the definition of ignorance. It is that which does not see. If we expect the blind to see, we will always be disappointed. If we expect the deaf to hear, we will always be disappointed. If we expect those who have gotten COVID and they can't taste or smell anymore to taste and smell, we will always be disappointed. If we expect a rock to have bodily sensations, we'll be disappointed. They don't have bodily sensations. Right? If we expect the cat to act like a human, we'll be disappointed. If we expect the birds to act like a fish, we'll be disappointed. So if we expect ignorance, the definition, the very definition of which, the very nature of which is to not know, to not see, to not be clear, to be deluded, to be confused. If we expect our ignorance to lead us to wisdom, we will always be disappointed. And on the flip side, if we expect our craving, our hunger, our thirst, our desire, if we expect the very thing which is to be unsatiated, what is hunger but to not be full? What is thirst but to not be sated? What is desire but to not be content? It is those things. That is what desire is. It's not some other thing. It's not some third thing. Desire is simply the lack of contentment. It's the opposite. What is hunger but the absence of being full? It's not some other thing. What is thirst but not being sated? It's not some other thing. So if we expect craving, which the very definition of which is to never be satisfied, a bottomless stomach, wide open eyes, if we expect our craving to lead us to a place of satisfaction, we will always, without fail, over and over, again and again, be disappointed. Craving leads to more hunger. Hunger does not become full. Delusion and confusion lead to more confusion and delusion. They don't lead to wisdom. It's not possible for a mango seed to produce an apple tree. So it's not possible for desire to produce contentment, at least craving. It's not possible for ignorance to produce wisdom. So of course, yes, we have to put desire in the sense of enthusiasm and interest into our practice. And many people will then say, oh, what about the desire to practice? What about the desire to meditate? What about the desire to give? What about the desire for this or that? And it's funny because it seems that whenever people talk about meditation, whenever they talk about virtue and precepts, whenever it comes to generosity, then that's when people get skeptical about desire. Oh, you're just giving because you're doing it for selfish reasons. You're just giving because you want to go to heaven. You're just giving because it makes you feel good. You're just following precepts because you feel more moral. You're just following precepts because of your attachments. You're just meditating because of your desire to attain enlightenment. You're just meditating because of your desire to be peaceful. But when it comes to eating food, they don't seem to question it, do they? When it comes to sleeping, they don't seem to question it. When it comes to enjoying sensual pleasures, having a family, all of a sudden, it's not a question. So why is it that when we come to spiritual practice, we're so concerned about our attachments to spiritual practice, so concerned about a desire to meditate, so concerned about our selfishness and being peaceful, but we're not concerned to the same extent when it comes to the other things? So if you just reflect on it like that, you'll see there is no question here. We have attachments. That's the reality. So as long as we have them, we need to steer them in the right direction. So hunger is not sated. Confusion is not clarified. It's only by following the path, by developing the opposite of craving and ignorance, that we can not repeat the same thing over and over again. Right? If it's up to craving, we'll do the same thing again and again. If it's up to ignorance, we'll do the same thing again and again. Ignorance forgets. Ignorance thinks it's the belief, it's the delusion, the confusion, the distortion. Ignorance is the distortion that says happiness is to be found out there. Craving is the delusion, the confusion, which says happiness is to be found out there. It's not. So we have to be reflective. We have to use our reflection to reflect and think, what am I repeating over and over again? What am I doing over and over again? And am I doing that again and again because of craving or because of ignorance? Right? And then we try to see, like, how can I steer that away, right? And we have to reflect because our ignorance doesn't want to see, our craving doesn't want to hear. So we have to reflect, like, okay, am I doing something because I'm just blindly following my inclinations, my defilements? Or am I doing this to go against the grain? Am I doing this to push against those things? So, if our stinginess tells us to enjoy things again and again, can we fight that with giving again and again? If our negligence and laziness inclines us to not follow the precepts, to be habitually more immoral and cutting corners again and again, Can we fight that with virtue and inner principles, inner integrity? Can we fight that again and again? If our mind doesn't want to be still, it wants to move and be restless and shoot out and explore the world, to go up and down and left and right, can we fight that again and again by trying to be content, be still, be happy? And so we have to fight these tendencies, but we fight them with kindness. We fight them with gentleness. We fight them with peace. We fight them with contentment. We fight them with forgiveness, right? Not with desire. We try to avoid using desire. Of course, it will happen. We will use desire, but we try our best to not follow that habit tendency, that channel. And so we try not to let craving infiltrate our meditation. Try not to let craving infiltrate your practice, and instead turn it into a practice of turning against those things, becoming more content, relaxing, becoming gentle, becoming aware. And so these are some reflections on the Buddha's teaching on the things that we do again and again. And so I hope that this is beneficial for you. I personally find it helpful, as you might tell. And so I hope that this is helpful for your day, helpful for your another day again, of the sun rising and setting. And so may this be fuel for your practice. May this be inspiration for your reflection, your meditation, your generosity, virtue, and practice. And so I think that this is enough for now, friends. This is enough to end the talk. And so I wish you all the best. And at this time, I'll check to see if there are any questions. And hello to all those who joined in live. We have people joining in and some people in the chat, like Maria, Madeline, Manal, Gregory, Bhavani. So hello to all of you, and thank you for your comments, your anjalis and welcomes and everything. It's really wonderful to see people joining and tuning in like that and leaving their thoughts. So greetings to all of you. And Manal has a comment here sharing, I think. It says, speaking of the caste system, the Ambedkar movement must have been so impactful for the Dalit community of India. Thanks to Lokanatha's aspirations and Dr. Ambedkar, hundreds of thousands of people broke free from this birth status and embraced Buddha's teachings. Yeah, thank you, Manal, for sharing that. And yeah, it's true for those who don't know. I'm sure that probably, Manal, you know much more about this than I do, but I know just the basics that, yeah, Dr. Ambedkar, of course, being an Indian a man who helped form the modern nation of India, as I understand it. And he was a leader of the Dalit community, which is sometimes called the untouchables or the outcasts. And these were the people who were basically the bottom of Indian society, kind of really, really pushed down to believed to be almost destined to that status, right? Not deserving of anything more because of just the family that they were born into. And there was a Buddhist monk who was actually an Italian. He might have been the first Italian Buddhist monk. And he walked, I believe, from Italy all the way eventually to India. And he brought a bunch of Buddhist monks from Asia along with him eventually on a pilgrimage to go convert Dr. Ambedkar to Buddhism and get the Dalit community converted to Buddhism. And it worked. And so Dr. Ambedkar at least adopted his interpretation of Buddhism. And it was very liberating. And, you know, a lot of those people, they were then trained that actually you're not inferior because of your family, because of your birth. So thank you for sharing that, Manal. Yeah. And Bhavani is saying, great chatting. I also want to do that. Very difficult, I think. Of course, yes, it's very difficult. But we should do it even though it's difficult, right? There's a poem, a sutta, which Bhante Sudaso, if you know, you might have heard him quote it because he quotes it quite often. It's a really good one. And it's a sutta where I believe it's a deity, a spirit or an angel, a deva, comes to the Buddha and says, it's so hard, so difficult. And the Buddha says, they do it even though it's hard. They do it even though it's difficult. And there's other places, you know, in the suttas where someone will say, like, I remember, I think a conversation going on in the suttas between Sariputta and another monk, and it's, you know, paraphrasing or kind of the gist of it was they say, you know, it's hard to go forth. It's hard to become a monk and renounce. He says, yeah, it's hard. But if you do it, then it won't be that hard to go to the next step. And say it's hard to be ethical. It's hard to be, to meditate or whatever. Yeah, it's hard. But if you do it, then etc. And they say, all these things are hard, but if you do them, actually, the results are not difficult. So it's like, it's both hard and easy. And yeah, you can also think about it like, we tend to think like, oh, it's so hard, it's so difficult to, not follow our desires. But actually, yes, it is very difficult. But at the same time, actually think about it. Is it really that difficult though? Like, okay, we wanna do something else. Okay. So why do we need to follow the desire? It's not that big of a deal. Like, oh, I want to eat, say you're following the 8 precepts and you're not, maybe not listening to music. Right? You say, oh, I want to listen to music. It's not that hard. Just don't do it. Okay, so what? It's just a little desire. That's all. You're not being tortured. You're not being, your limbs aren't being sawed off, and you're not being poked with a spear through all the parts of your body and ripped into pieces. It's just a little desire to listen to music. Okay, just disregard it. So actually, it's difficult. It is hard, but at the same time, is it really that difficult? And that's the thing, is that our desires and our confusions, they kind of trick us into thinking it's a bigger deal than it is. But it's actually not that big of a deal. Like, okay, so I want to do something. Okay, whatever. Just, just try to do what's good. So yeah, Madeline says it's difficult but worth it. Sadhu, Madeline. Yeah, so yeah, it's difficult, but it's worth it, right? Exactly. Okay, friends, so sadhu for listening. We can close with 3 more sadhus to rejoice in your practice, rejoice in the goodness of listening and reflecting and sharing and so. And then I'll wish you all the best, and we'll see you for monk chat this evening if you're there. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.